Have you noticed that the moments when you forget a name or walk into a room only to wonder why you came there, those small, quiet lapses, seem to carry more weight than they used to? They arrive with an unspoken question, one you might not even admit to yourself. Is this the beginning of something? For years, we've been told that cognitive decline is simply part of aging, as inevitable as gray hair or changing eyesight. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the brain doesn't have to wind down? And what if the difference between those who remain sharp and those who don't has nothing to do with luck or genetics alone? There is a growing body of observation, not miracle claims, but careful research, suggesting that how the brain ages is largely shaped by how it is used, fed, rested, and challenged. And that changes everything about how we might approach the second half of life. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The Living Brain, Understanding Cognitive Health Across the Years, a thoughtful exploration of memory, attention, and mental vitality for the second half of life. There is a question that arrives quietly, usually somewhere in the fifth decade, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. It arrives not as a crisis, but as a gentle curiosity, a moment of reflection after forgetting a name, misplacing glasses, or walking into a room only to wonder what brought you there. The question is simple and profound. Is this normal? And beneath it, unspoken but deeply felt, is this the beginning of decline? These moments are nearly universal. They are also, for the vast majority of people, entirely normal. But normality does not mean inevitability. The question of what happens to the brain as the years accumulate, and what might be done to influence that process, deserves careful exploration, not through the lens of fear or miracle promises, but through the steady light of observation, research, and practical wisdom. This is an exploration of the living brain, not as a machine that inevitably wears out, but as an organ that responds to its environment, adapts to its use, and reflects the accumulated habits of a lifetime. It is written for those who wish to understand, not simply to be told, for those who prefer knowledge to alarm, and who recognize that the second half of life offers not only challenges, but opportunities for growth, depth, and continued vitality. Part 1. The brain that changes. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing view among neuroscientists was that the adult brain was essentially fixed. After a critical period in childhood and adolescence, the structure was set, the connections established, and the only direction possible was gradual decline. This view had a certain grim logic to it, matching the observable experience of aging in many people. And it shaped both medical advice and personal expectations for generations. That understanding has been completely transformed. The brain, it turns out, retains the capacity for change throughout life. This quality, known as neuroplasticity, means that every experience, every learning opportunity, every new skill acquired leaves a physical trace. When a person learns something new, the brain does not simply store the information in some ethereal filing system. It physically changes. Neurons create new connections. Existing pathways strengthen. In some cases, entirely new neurons are formed, though this remains more common in some brain regions than others. This discovery shifts the entire conversation about aging and cognition. If the brain were fixed, then cognitive aging would be a matter of fate, whatever genetic inheritance provided, whatever early development established, would simply unwind over time. But if the brain changes in response to experience, then the question becomes not what will happen, but what experiences are being provided. What is the brain being asked to do each day? What challenges does it face? What rest does it receive? What nourishment does it get? These are not medical questions in the traditional sense. They are lifestyle questions, environmental questions, questions of daily habit and accumulated practice. and they are questions over which individuals have considerable influence. The path and the forest. A useful way to understand neuroplasticity is to imagine walking through a field of tall grass. The first time through, there is no path. Progress is slow, the way unclear, and the effort considerable. But walking the same route again, the grass begins to bend. A faint trail emerges. With enough repetition, that trail becomes visible, then well-worn. Eventually a clear path that others can follow easily. Neural pathways develop in exactly this way. When information is learned, when a skill is practiced, when a pattern of thinking is repeated, the relevant neural connections are strengthened. The electrical impulses that travel along these pathways encounter less resistance. The communication becomes faster, more automatic, more efficient. This is why skills become easier with practice. This is why information reviewed multiple times is better remembered than information encountered once. This is why habits, once established, feel natural and require less conscious effort to maintain. The physical structure of the brain has literally been reshaped by experience. The implications of this for cognitive aging are profound. If the pathways most frequently used are the ones that remain strongest, then the question becomes, which pathways are being used? A brain regularly engaged in learning, problem-solving, and focused attention will maintain those networks. A brain rarely challenged in these ways will find those pathways growing faint, overgrown with the neural equivalent of disuse. This is not a moral judgment, but a biological observation. Use and disuse have consequences for the brain just as they do for the body. A muscle not exercised atrophies. A neural pathway not traveled becomes harder to traverse. The principle is the same. The filter that shapes reality. Before any information reaches conscious awareness, it passes through a filtering system located in the brainstem known as the reticular activating system. This collection of nerves has a critical job, determining what deserves attention and what can be safely ignored. Every second, the senses collect an enormous amount of information: sights, sounds, smells, textures, temperatures, internal sensations. Conscious processing of all this data would be overwhelming. Impossible. The reticular activating system acts as a gatekeeper, allowing through only what it deems important. How does it determine importance? Largely through instruction from higher brain regions based on priorities, goals, and habits of attention. If someone is looking for a specific book in a library, the reticular activating system will highlight spines of that color, titles containing those words, while suppressing the thousands of other books visible. If someone is thinking about buying a particular model of car, they suddenly notice that model everywhere, not because more have appeared, but because the brain's filtering system has been instructed to let that information through. This filtering mechanism has profound implications for how people experience their own cognitive abilities. If the dominant internal question is, why do I always forget things? The reticular activating system will dutifully highlight every forgotten item, every momentary lapse, every instance that confirms the premise. The world will appear to provide endless evidence of poor memory. If, instead, the operating question becomes, what helps me remember this? The filtering system shifts. It begins noticing strategies that work, techniques that aid recall, moments when memory functions well. The evidence collected changes, and with it, the experience of one's own mind. The questions people ask themselves, often unconsciously, shape what they perceive. And what they perceive shapes what they believe about themselves. And what they believe shapes what they attempt, what they persist in, what they ultimately achieve. This circular relationship between belief and experience operates throughout life, for better or worse. Part 2. The shape of cognitive aging. Long-term studies tracking cognitive performance across the lifespan have identified patterns that challenge common assumptions. Rather than a steady, gradual decline from early adulthood, cognitive aging tends to follow a different trajectory, one with distinct phases and notable inflection points. The two dips. Researchers have observed two periods when cognitive performance, on average, shows measurable decline. The first occurs after graduation from formal education. This is not a biological inevitability, but a behavioral pattern. Many people, upon completing their schooling, unconsciously adopt the belief that learning is finished. The structured mental challenges, regular acquisition of new knowledge, and constant intellectual stretching that characterized formal education come to an end. Unless deliberately replaced, cognitive exercise in these areas diminishes, and with diminished use comes diminished capacity. The second dip often coincides with retirement from full-time employment. Here again, the pattern is not purely biological, but behavioral. Work, for all its stresses and frustrations, typically provides a structure of mental demands, problems to solve, decisions to make, information to track, people to coordinate, schedules to manage. These demands, while sometimes exhausting, also exercise cognitive faculties. When work ends, so do these demands. And if nothing equally engaging replaces them, the mind can begin to drift. The observation that some people experience significant cognitive decline after retirement, while others maintain sharp function well into their later years, points to the importance of what comes next. Retirement from a career need not mean retirement from mental engagement. The key variable is not the presence or absence of paid work, but the presence or absence of sustained cognitive challenge. The Nun Study. One of the most instructive long-term investigations of aging comes from an unexpected source: a community of Catholic nuns in the United States. The Nun Study, formerly known as the Aging with Grace Study, followed members of the School Sisters of Notre Dame for decades, examining what distinguished those who lived long, cognitively sharp lives from those who did not. The nuns made ideal research subjects for several reasons. They lived similar lives, similar diets, similar housing, similar daily routines, similar access to health care. This consistency reduced the variables that complicate most aging research. They had also, in many cases, kept autobiographical writings from early in their lives, providing a window into their young adult minds. The findings were striking. Those nuns who remained cognitively sharp into their 90s and beyond shared two notable characteristics. The first was a pattern of positive emotional expression in their early writings, more sentences expressing joy, gratitude, and hope. The second, and for this discussion particularly relevant, was a commitment to lifelong learning. They continued to engage with new ideas, to challenge their minds, to learn throughout their days. The difference this made was not subtle. Those who remained mentally active lived longer and retained cognitive function longer. Daily learning appeared to add years to life and, perhaps more importantly, life to years. The two-thirds rule. Research into the factors that influence cognitive aging suggests a useful framework for thinking about control and influence. Approximately one-third of brain performance in later life appears to be determined by genetic factors, the inherited biological equipment with which each person begins. The remaining two-thirds falls within the domain of lifestyle, environment, and daily choices. A metaphor sometimes used in discussions of Alzheimer's disease captures this relationship. Genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. The genetic inheritance provides a baseline, a predisposition, a range of possibilities. Within that range, the actual outcome is shaped by how one lives. This understanding shifts cognitive aging from the realm of fate to the realm of influence. Family history provides useful information. worth knowing and considering. But it does not determine destiny. The choices made today, this week, this year, about food, about activity, about rest, about engagement, accumulate into the cognitive future. Part 3. The architecture of memory. To understand how to support memory, it helps to understand what memory actually is. Popular imagination often treats memory as a single thing, a kind of mental filing cabinet where experiences are stored and from which they can be retrieved. This image is appealingly simple but fundamentally misleading. Memory is not one thing, but many. It involves multiple systems operating in parallel, encoding different types of information in different ways, storing them in different brain regions, and retrieving them through different pathways. Encoding, storage, retrieval. Every memory begins with encoding, the process by which information entering the brain is transformed into a form that can be stored. This is the moment of initial learning, when attention is directed to some piece of information, when it is processed and prepared for retention. Encoding is not automatic. Much of what passes through the senses never gets encoded at all, never moves beyond the fleeting moment of perception. What determines whether information gets encoded? Attention plays a central role. Information that receives focused attention is far more likely to be encoded than information processed casually. Emotional significance matters as well. Events that trigger strong feelings, positive or negative, tend to be better remembered. Repetition helps, though the quality of repetition matters more than simple quantity. And association, connecting new information to something already known, dramatically improves encoding. Storage follows encoding. This is the maintenance of information over time, the creation of a neural representation that persists. Different types of memories are stored in different brain regions and for different durations. Working memory holds information temporarily, for seconds or minutes, while it is being used. Long-term memory, as the name suggests, can last a lifetime. The transfer from working memory to long-term storage is not automatic, but requires specific conditions, adequate attention, meaningful processing, and often, sleep. Retrieval is the final stage, the act of bringing stored information back into conscious awareness. Retrieval is not a simple matter of opening a file and reading its contents. It is a reconstructive process, a reassembly of elements into a coherent whole. This is why memories can feel different each time they are recalled, why details may shift, why context matters so much for remembering. Many apparent memory failures are actually encoding failures. The information was never properly stored, so it cannot later be retrieved. Others are retrieval failures. The information is there, but cannot be accessed, like a book in a library with an unreadable catalog number. Understanding where in this process a difficulty occurs points toward appropriate solutions. The place of place. One of the most reliable observations about memory is its connection to location. People who cannot remember where they put their keys often find them by retracing their steps, going back to the place where they last had them. Walking into a room and forgetting why reveals the same principle. Returning to the original location often brings the reason back. This connection between memory and place is not accidental. The brain's spatial processing systems, evolved for navigation and environmental awareness, are closely linked to memory systems. Information encoded with a spatial context, where it was learned, where it was experienced, becomes easier to retrieve because more pathways lead to it. This observation underlies one of the most durable and effective memory techniques, the method of loci, used by ancient Greek and Roman orators to remember long speeches. The technique involves imagining a familiar place, a house, a street, a building, and mentally placing the items to be remembered at specific locations along that route. To retrieve them, one mentally walks the route and observes what is there. The technique works because it leverages the brain's natural affinity for spatial information, providing a structure within which memories can be organized and from which they can be reliably retrieved. The visual advantage. The brain devotes more of its processing power to vision than to any other sense. Approximately 1/3 of the cerebral cortex is involved in visual processing. This investment reflects the central importance of sight for survival, identifying food, detecting threats, navigating terrain, recognizing faces. This visual advantage extends to memory. Information presented visually is generally better remembered than information presented through other channels. Faces are remembered more easily than names because they are seen. Pictures are recalled better than words describing the same content. Mental images, vividly imagined, can serve as powerful memory aids. The implication is practical. To remember something, make it visual. Transform abstract information into concrete images. Make those images unusual, striking, even bizarre. The brain tends to remember what stands out. Connect those images to familiar locations. This combination of visual encoding and spatial organization creates multiple pathways for later retrieval. Part 4. The attention economy. Attention is the gateway to memory. Information that does not receive attention has almost no chance of being encoded, stored, or later retrieved. Yet attention, in the modern world, faces constant assault. The fragmented mind. The average adult now encounters more information in a single day than someone living 3 centuries ago would have encountered in a lifetime. This flood of data comes through screens, notifications, alerts, headlines, messages, streams, and feeds. The sheer volume ensures that most of it is never truly processed, never moves beyond the most superficial level of awareness. More concerning than the volume is the fragmentation. Attention in the digital environment is constantly pulled in multiple directions. A task started is interrupted by a notification. A thought begun is derailed by an incoming message. A conversation held is punctuated by glances at a phone. This constant switching carries a cognitive cost. Each shift of attention requires time to reorient, to remember where one was, to reestablish the mental context. The cumulative effect is a mind that rarely settles into sustained focus. For memory, this fragmentation is devastating. Deep encoding requires sustained attention. The brain needs time to process information, to connect it to existing knowledge, to create the neural structures that support later retrieval. Shallow. Fragmented attention produces shallow, fragmented memories, easily lost, difficult to retrieve. The conditions for flow. When attention does settle, when focus becomes sustained and effortless, a state sometimes called flow can emerge. In this state, self-consciousness fades, time seems to disappear, and performance reaches its peak. Athletes describe it as being in the zone. Artists know it as the experience of losing themselves in their work. Anyone who has been completely absorbed in a satisfying task has tasted it. Flow is not mysterious. It arises under specific, reproducible conditions. The task must be challenging enough to demand full attention, but not so challenging as to cause anxiety. Goals must be clear. Feedback must be immediate. Distractions must be absent. Under these conditions, attention locks onto the task, and the rest of the world fades away. Creating conditions for flow in daily life requires deliberate structuring. It means protecting blocks of time from interruption. It means matching tasks to current skill levels, not too easy, not too hard. It means clarifying what success looks like moment by moment. It means removing the devices and notifications that fragment attention. The reward for this effort is not only better performance in the moment, but also deeper encoding of whatever is being learned or practiced. Flow states are learning states. The brain, fully engaged, creates stronger, more durable memories. The open loop. There is a curious feature of human psychology. Tasks that have been started but not completed occupy mental space. They linger at the edges of awareness, demanding attention, creating a kind of cognitive tension. Completed tasks, by contrast, release their hold on the mind and fade from consciousness. This phenomenon, known as the Zeigarnik effect, has practical implications for focus and productivity. The hardest part of any task is often the beginning, the moment of overcoming inertia, of committing to action. But once begun, the task itself generates a kind of momentum. The brain wants to finish what it has started. This is why breaking large goals into the smallest possible first steps can be so effective. The step must be so small that it cannot be refused. Opening the book to read one sentence. Putting on walking shoes without committing to a walk. Writing the first sentence of an email. Once that tiny action is taken, the Zeigarnik effect takes over. The brain, now holding an open loop, pushes toward completion. Part 5. The body's influence on the mind. The relationship between brain and body is not one way. The brain controls movement, but movement also shapes the brain. Physical states influence mental states. What happens in the body affects what happens in the mind. Movement and brain function. When the body moves, it releases chemicals that support brain health. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, sometimes called BDNF, acts as a fertilizer for neurons. It supports their survival, encourages the growth of new connections, and creates conditions favorable to learning and memory. Exercise increases BDNF levels. Sedentary behavior reduces them. The connection between movement and cognition is visible in research. People who exercise regularly perform better on tests of memory and executive function. Children who are physically active learn more effectively. Older adults who maintain physical activity show slower cognitive decline. The relationship holds across the lifespan. This does not require intense athletic training. Walking, gardening, dancing, swimming, any activity that raises the heart rate and engages the body appears to benefit the brain. The key is consistency, not intensity. Regular movement, sustained over time, produces cumulative effects. The rhythm of engagement. There is also a more subtle relationship between movement and cognition. Rhythmic, repetitive movement, walking, running, cycling on a stationary bike, can create a mental state particularly conducive to learning. The body's rhythm seems to entrain the mind, supporting a kind of steady attention that facilitates encoding. Many people report their best thinking happens while walking. Ideas come more freely. Problems seem more soluble. This is not imagination. The mild aerobic activity increases blood flow to the brain, delivering oxygen and glucose. The rhythmic movement may also reduce stress and quiet mental chatter, allowing deeper processing. The practical implication is straightforward. If learning is the goal, consider moving while doing it. Listen to educational content while walking. Review material while on an exercise bike. Think through problems while moving through the environment. The body's movement supports the mind's work. The sleep connection. No discussion of brain health is complete without addressing sleep. During sleep, the brain performs essential maintenance that cannot happen during waking hours. The glymphatic system, active primarily during deep sleep, clears waste products from brain tissue. Among the substances removed is beta amyloid, a protein that accumulates abnormally in Alzheimer's disease. During REM sleep, the brain consolidates memories. Information held temporarily in short-term storage is transferred to long-term memory, integrated with existing knowledge, and stabilized for future retrieval. This process is not optional. Sleep deprivation impairs memory formation. Chronic sleep problems increase risk of cognitive decline. The quality of sleep matters as much as quantity. Deep sleep and REM sleep serve different functions, and both are necessary. Devices that track sleep stages can provide useful information, but the most important measure is subjective. Waking feeling rested, maintaining alertness through the day, not relying on caffeine to overcome sleepiness. The gut-brain axis. The digestive system and the brain are connected through multiple pathways. The vagus nerve carries signals in both directions. The gut microbiome produces neurotransmitters that influence mood and cognition. The immune system, heavily represented in the gut, communicates with the brain about inflammation and infection. This connection means that what happens in the digestive system affects the brain. Inflammation in the gut can contribute to inflammation throughout the body, including the brain. Imbalances in gut bacteria have been linked to mood disorders and cognitive issues. Food sensitivities, even subtle ones, can affect mental clarity. The practical implications are still being researched, but some patterns have emerged. Diets high in fiber, fermented foods, and diverse plant matter support a healthy microbiome. Highly processed foods, excessive sugar, and artificial additives may disrupt it. Individual responses vary considerably, making personal observation important. Part 6. Nutrition and the brain. The brain is metabolically expensive, making up only about 2% of body weight. It consumes approximately 20% of the body's energy. It requires a steady supply of nutrients, and its function is affected by what is and is not provided. Fuel and structure. The brain runs primarily on glucose, a simple sugar derived from carbohydrates. But glucose metabolism requires various cofactors, vitamins and minerals that enable the chemical reactions. B vitamins, particularly B6, B12, and folate, are involved in neurotransmitter production and the regulation of homocysteine, an amino acid linked to cognitive decline when elevated. Vitamin D, actually a hormone, has receptors throughout the brain and appears important for many aspects of brain function. The brain structure is largely fat. The membranes surrounding neurons, the myelin sheaths that insulate nerve fibers, the signaling molecules that carry messages between cells, all are built from fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, are concentrated in brain tissue and must be obtained from the diet or supplements. Foods associated with cognitive health. Certain foods appear repeatedly in research on brain health. Fatty fish like salmon, sardines, and mackerel provide DHA and EPA. The omega-3s most directly involved in brain structure and function. Leafy greens like spinach, kale, and collards supply folate, vitamin E, and carotenoids. Berries, especially blueberries, contain flavonoids that concentrate in brain regions involved in memory. Nuts and seeds provide vitamin E and healthy fats. Whole grains offer steady glucose release without the spikes of refined carbohydrates. The patterns are more important than individual foods. Diets characterized by whole foods, plants, healthy fats, and minimal processing consistently outperform those heavy in refined carbohydrates, industrial oils, and artificial ingredients. The Mediterranean diet, which emphasizes these qualities, has been associated with slower cognitive decline in multiple studies. Individual variation. General patterns provide useful guidance, but individual responses to foods vary considerably. Food sensitivities can cause inflammation that affects the brain. Allergies, even mild ones, may influence cognitive function. Gut bacteria composition differs from person to person, affecting how foods are digested and which nutrients are absorbed. Testing can provide personalized information. Food sensitivity panels. microbiome analysis, and nutrient profiles are increasingly available and increasingly affordable. For those experiencing cognitive issues without clear cause, such testing may reveal contributing factors not obvious from general dietary advice. Part 7. The environment within and without. The brain exists in a body, and the body exists in an environment. Both environments, internal and external, affect how the brain functions. The internal environment. Stress is perhaps the most significant internal environmental factor affecting the brain. The stress response, evolved for short-term threats, becomes problematic when activated chronically. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, damages brain cells when levels remain elevated for extended periods. The hippocampus, a region central to memory formation, is particularly vulnerable. Chronic stress also impairs neuroplasticity, reducing the brain's ability to form new connections and adapt to new circumstances. It shifts resources away from long-term maintenance toward immediate survival, a reasonable trade-off in emergencies but damaging when sustained. Managing stress is therefore not merely about feeling better in the moment. It is about protecting the brain's structure and function over the long term. Different approaches work for different people: meditation, time in nature, physical activity, creative expression, social connection. The specific method matters less than the consistent practice. The external environment, the air people breathe, the water they drink, the substances they encounter in their homes and workplaces, all affect brain health. Air pollution has been linked to increased risk of cognitive decline and stroke. Fine particulate matter, small enough to enter the bloodstream and reach the brain, appears particularly harmful. Water quality matters as well. Various contaminants, from heavy metals to industrial chemicals, can affect neurological function. Filtering drinking water is a simple precaution that may have significant benefits. Indoor environments deserve attention. Off-gassing from new furniture, carpets, and building materials can introduce neurotoxic compounds into the air. Cleaning products, air fresheners, and personal care items may contain ingredients that affect the nervous system. Ventilation, air purification, and conscious selection of products can reduce these exposures. The digital environment. The environment now includes the digital realm, and it affects the brain. Constant connectivity fragments attention. Social media algorithms exploit attention for commercial purposes. Blue light from screens affects sleep. The sheer volume of information creates a kind of cognitive overload that leaves little capacity for deep processing. Simple practices can help. Keeping phones out of the bedroom improves sleep. Not checking devices for the first 30 minutes of the day sets a different tone for attention. Scheduled periods of disconnection allow the brain to rest and consolidate. The digital environment, like the physical one, can be managed rather than simply endured. Part 8. Learning as lifelong practice. If the brain changes in response to use, then learning is not merely an activity of youth, but a practice for all of life. The question is not whether learning continues, but what is being learned. The nature of adult learning. Adult learning differs from childhood learning in important ways. Children's brains are optimized for rapid acquisition of fundamental skills: language, movement, social understanding. Adult brains have different strengths: pattern recognition, integration of new information with existing knowledge, application of learning to real-world contexts. These differences mean that adult learning should look different from childhood education. Adults learn best when they understand the relevance of what they are learning, when they can connect it to their existing knowledge, when they have some control over the process, and when they can apply learning immediately. Reading as cognitive exercise. Reading deserves special mention as a form of cognitive engagement. A book represents the concentrated experience of another mind, research conducted, lessons learned, perspectives developed, wisdom accumulated over years or decades. Reading that book allows access to that experience in a matter of hours. Beyond the content, the act of reading itself exercises the brain. Following an argument, tracking characters, holding multiple threads in mind while progressing through pages. These activities require sustained attention, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. Regular reading is associated with slower cognitive decline and later dementia onset. The form of reading matters less than the engagement. Physical books, e-books, audiobooks, each has advantages. The key is regular, focused engagement with complex material that challenges the mind. Learning with intention. The intention with which one learns affects how well one learns. Learning something with the explicit intention of teaching it to someone else changes how the brain processes the information. Attention sharpens. Questions arise more readily. Connections form more richly. The material is encoded more deeply. This is sometimes called the explanation effect. Preparing to explain requires organizing knowledge, identifying what is essential, translating into language others can understand. These activities strengthen learning and reveal gaps in understanding that might otherwise go unnoticed. The Feynman technique, named for the physicist Richard Feynman, formalizes this insight. Learn something, then explain it as simply as possible, as if to someone with no background in the subject. Where explanation fails, return to the material and study further. Repeat until simple explanation is possible. The process ensures genuine understanding, not merely superficial familiarity. Part 9. Social connection and cognitive health. Humans are social creatures. The brain evolved in contexts where connection with others was essential for survival. This evolutionary heritage means that social isolation is not merely unpleasant, but biologically stressful. The social brain, interacting with others, requires complex cognitive operations. Following a conversation requires attention, memory, language processing, perspective taking, emotional regulation, reading facial expressions, interpreting tone, responding appropriately. All these draw on multiple brain systems simultaneously. Social engagement is, in effect, a form of cognitive exercise. This may help explain why socially connected individuals consistently show better cognitive outcomes in aging studies. Those with strong social networks, regular social activities, and meaningful relationships tend to maintain cognitive function longer than those who are isolated. Quality over quantity. The number of social connections matters less than their quality. A few deep relationships provide more cognitive benefit than many superficial ones. The key is meaningful interaction, conversation that engages the mind, shared activities that require coordination, emotional connection that activates reward systems. For those whose social circles naturally shrink with age, through retirement, relocation, loss of loved ones, deliberate effort may be needed to maintain social engagement. Community organizations, volunteer work, classes, religious institutions, and other group activities can provide opportunities for meaningful connection. Purpose and contribution. Beyond social connection, having a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, a feeling that one's life matters, appears protective of cognitive health. Purpose provides motivation for engagement, direction for effort, and resilience in the face of challenges. Purpose need not be grand or publicly visible. Caring for family, contributing to community, pursuing creative work, maintaining a garden, mentoring others. Any activity that feels meaningful can serve this function. The key is having something that matters, something that calls forth effort and attention. Part 10. Practical integration. Knowledge without application remains merely information. The challenge is translating understanding into daily practice in ways that are sustainable and effective. Starting where you are. The impulse, upon learning what supports brain health, is to change everything at once. This impulse almost always fails. The gap between aspiration and current reality is too large. The effort required is too great. When the inevitable slip occurs, discouragement follows, and the attempt is abandoned. A more effective approach is to start where you are. Identify one area, just one, where a small change seems possible. Make that change. Allow it to become established, to feel normal, to require less conscious effort. Then consider another. This approach respects the brain's own learning principles. Small, consistent steps create pathways. Each small success builds confidence and capacity for the next. Over time, the accumulated changes amount to transformation. The questions that guide. The questions one asks oneself shape what one notices and what one does. Asking, what small step could I take today, generates different possibilities than asking, why is this so hard? Asking, what worked well this week, directs attention to successes rather than failures. Asking, what did I learn, frames experience as growth. Cultivating useful questions is itself a practice. It means noticing the habitual questions that run through the mind and gently replacing them with more constructive ones. It means approaching each day with curiosity rather than judgment. The rhythm of renewal. Brain health is not achieved once and then maintained automatically. It requires ongoing attention, regular practice, periodic renewal. Just as the body needs consistent exercise, not a single intense workout, the brain needs consistent engagement, not occasional bursts of effort. This rhythm of renewal includes times of intense focus and times of rest, times of learning and times of consolidation, times of social engagement and times of solitude. The brain, like all living systems, operates in cycles. Supporting its health means respecting those cycles. Conclusion. The living brain. The brain is not a machine that inevitably wears out. It is a living organ that responds to how it is treated. It changes in response to use. It adapts to challenges. It reflects the accumulated habits of a lifetime. This understanding offers both responsibility and hope. Responsibility. Because choices matter. What one eats, how one moves, where attention goes, whether one engages or withdraws. These daily decisions shape the cognitive future. Hope, because change remains possible. The brain retains plasticity throughout life. New pathways can form. Old patterns can shift. Growth can continue. The question is not whether cognitive aging occurs. It does, for everyone. The question is what form it takes, whether decline accelerates or slows. Whether capacity shrinks or finds new expression. Whether the later years bring diminishment or continued development. The answer lies not in genetics alone, not in luck, not in some miracle intervention yet to be discovered. It lies in the accumulated weight of daily choices, in the habits that shape attention, in the engagements that challenge the mind, in the connections that sustain the spirit. The brain you have today is the brain you have built through years of living. The brain you will have tomorrow is being built by how you live today. This is not a burden, but an opportunity, a chance to participate consciously in the shaping of your own mind, to bring awareness to the process of aging, to meet the later years not as decline to be feared, but as a phase of life with its own possibilities for growth. The living brain, properly understood and carefully tended, can continue to develop across all the years of life. Not without change, not without some slowing, some forgetting, some moments of searching for words that once came easily, but with the capacity for new learning, new understanding, new appreciation of the world and one's place in it. This is the truth that research reveals, and that lived experience confirms. The brain is alive. It responds. It grows. And with attention and care, it can sustain its vitality across the full span of human years. The single most important truth to carry forward is this. The brain you have tomorrow is being built by how you live today, not determined by the number of years you have lived. Every choice about what you eat, how you move, where you direct your attention, whether you engage or withdraw, these are not separate from your cognitive future. They are its architects. If this exploration has stirred something in you, a question, a recognition, a new intention, consider sharing it in the comments. What you are learning here joins a larger conversation, one that includes others walking the same path. And if you would like to continue building your understanding, the library holds many more volumes. Subscribe so that new wisdom finds its way to you. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.